I'm with Steve Clemons. He was a moderator at two of the great panels at the Doha Forum in the Middle East. We were with him a bunch of days last week, flew back together on the plane. I think it took me, Steve, to get back from Doha to Norfolk, Virginia. It took me, from the time I actually got in the car at the hotel, 22 hours. 22 out of 24 hours traveling to get back with the time change. Steve, I know you got a little jet lag. Great to have you with us, man.
You know, what's great with jet lag, I almost have you beat because I actually landed in Philadelphia with you, and then I rented a car, drove to New York for a Christmas party, and drove back to Philadelphia last night just to keep myself awake so I would get back in our zone. I just have one thing to mention. I didn't title that book. Trust me, I'm an expert. I hate the title of that book. Somebody else titled it, so totally with you on that.
Oh my good. All right. Well, it's a good title though, Steve.
Yeah, no, it's not a good title. It's not a good title. It's an edited book. But anyway, it was fun traveling with you, and honestly, you and your wife were just a breath of fresh air there. You know, there's a lot of people that I think are kind of full of themselves. These things are diva contests in many ways. But, I mean, the forum was fascinating, but I love how engaged you were through all the sessions, and I just want to compliment you on that.
Well, thank you, Steve. That's very nice of you to say. I really appreciate that. And, of course, you were the moderator on two of them. But what was interesting about this is there were about 3,000 people there from around the world. I think 70 people were represented. This was at the Doha Forum, their 18th, and 70 people from the United States. But just as a tidbit aside on what you said, there was a lot of people there that were enamored with the trip. Like it was all about the trip there and not the conference, and it's just not U.S. people. But they were like, it was all about like what plane did you fly on and how big was it and did you have this and were you first class? And so it was all about the trip, and then, half of them didn't even show up at some of the conferences. I didn't miss any of them, and some of them I want to go over because, you learn, Steve, you learn so much. The two that you moderated, I'm going to get into that in a minute, but I want to share with your audience a couple of the really cool ones. Like there was an interview that Barbara Robin did, you'll have to say her last name, I forgot it, with the Iranian foreign minister. Which, I mean, I got to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, there was 2,500, 3,000 people in this huge auditorium, everything on screen. So you got the Iranian foreign minister getting into it. That was a great interview. And just,
Javad Zarif
there was
Robin
no
White.
Holds barred, right?
Yeah, no holds barred.
Go ahead.
She was stuff on him. And Robin, who writes a lot for the New Yorker magazine now, she used to be one of the lead international correspondents for many years for the Washington Post, and is really one of the country's best experts on the Middle East, and particularly Iran. And she's been, tough on Javad Zarif, who's the foreign minister. He was previously Iran's ambassador to United Nations. But when Ahmadinejad was president of Iran, Javad Zarif was in disfavor, and he sort of disappeared for a while. Like he was not, when
Really?
you see the winners and losers in Iranian politics from afar, the guy we saw in Doha used to be someone whose life was in danger, and he's considered to be part, if you can consider any part of Iran, the reform community. He's the reform community. I'm always careful telling people there are no white hats and black hats. They're all kind of dark shades of gray everywhere. But it was a fascinating exchange, and you saw one of the great performances, I think, in foreign affairs in her interview with him.
Well, and then his responses were classic. Now, and here's what I learned from that. Two things. One, and I just want to get your comment. The first thing I learned is Robin said to him, well, as a foreign minister, there's unrest in your country. Your people are unhappy. Your regime might not survive. I'm paraphrasing the question, but that was the gist of it. And his answer was, look, you've been telling us this for 40 years. And he said, we have survived for 40 years. We have no umbrella security. We have no NATO. We have nobody that backs us. Everything we have is loose. And Saddam Hussein rolled his tanks in towards Tehran. Everybody in the West backed him, Robin, including you and everybody else. Nobody backed us. Nobody gave us a chance. And here we are under constant pressure from the United States 40 years later, still standing. So I think as far as our people is concerned, we're in pretty good shape. But that was a great answer.
It was a great answer, and I've thought a lot about it since he answered it. And, I find Javad Zarif, the foreign minister, very, very interesting. But what Robin didn't say in response was that if she were interviewing Kim Jong-un of North Korea, he could say the same thing. And so Javad Zarif was trying to argue that their country, which has no backstop, that has, America that has been at odds with it for all of this time, that he was trying to say that they could not have survived, that they did not have the robust support of their own people, because she was asking him, what about Iran's human rights abuses? What about the terrible things it has done? Because she was saying, Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia and these implications that he directed the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi, and Javad kind of went off on that and said, it's typical of this murderous regime, et cetera, and then shared that. But he said you wouldn't. But, if you use fear, harassment, and all sorts of control techniques, as you see in North Korea, you can also stay in power for many, many decades without the support of your people. And that would have been the response I would have offered to take it one step further.
Right. That would have been the definite follow-up question. You're on the John Fredericks Radio Network, Trucking the Truth Across America. I'm with Steve Clemons. He was a key moderator in two very influential panels at the 18th Doha conference that just concluded this weekend in Qatar. And Steve is also the Washington editor-at-large for The Atlantic, and he's also editor of The Atlantic Live. He writes frequently about Middle East politics and foreign affairs. Also, now let's get to, and you can do the names better than me. Let's get to the chief Palestinian. The chief. This was another class.
Isn't he something?
Yeah, I don't do this justice on the radio. Yeah. You just had to be there, and it's just one interviewer, an Erekat who's in leadership in the Palestinian government, chief negotiator, and it's just freewheeling. I mean, there's no boundaries, and there's 3,000 people in there, and he's just going off. He went off for 30 minutes, but tell him about the fight he had in the White House with Jared Kushner. That was a classic.
Well, Saeb Erekat has been for many, many decades, and I'm not joking about the word decades. The lead negotiator for the Palestinians with the Israelis and the rest of the world on trying to negotiate a settlement, and so he's been there in the system forever. And the gentleman that was trying to interview him but could hardly get a word in edgeways was Rob Malley, who's president of the International Crisis Group and used to be in Obama's White House on the National Security Council team. And literally, Saeb shut him out. But what Saeb conveyed is, I think he wanted to convey a feistiness and a resilience to pressure that he confessed that they had a major blow up, a screaming, yelling match with Jared Kushner, who is of course President Trump's designee, along with Jonathan Greenblatt, to try to work out a broad deal. What some have called the deal of the century in the Middle East on a Palestinian two-state solution, or something that would approximate that in the region. And we had never heard of this blow-up between them that apparently was a screaming match.
Yeah, and in part of it, I guess he said he told Jared Kushner in the White House, he said, well, if you move the embassy, the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem, there will never be a peace treaty. It just is not going to happen. It's not going to happen. And he said that Kushner screamed at him, don't threaten me. So I thought that was a good tidbit of info. But boy, there was no compromise there. I mean, I got out of that, and when it ended, and I said to myself, there's no peace plan. There's no grand plan. There's no anything, because he said...
Well, I would disagree respectfully in the sense, I mean, from Saeb Erekat's viewpoint, there's no peace plan. And, many of us have been watching the Middle East also agreed with Saeb that moving our designated capital before you had a kind of broader arrangement sort of took out one of the legs of a potential peace deal and removed our leverage. But, take it as it is. That's where we are now, and so you need to work with that. And what the Palestinians have been unwilling to do, is to do anything else, and it's made them largely irrelevant to the peace deal. But where I kind of disagree, and this is why the Jamal Khashoggi thing, which is also kind of a discussion that reverberated, is that Jared Kushner believed that he could do a deal with the Saudis, backstopping a deal no matter what the Palestinians wanted. So you could kind of jump over the Palestinians, jump over Saeb Erekat, work out a deal and an arrangement that brought together all the major stakeholders, Arab states in the region behind it, and kind of force the Palestinians to accept that. But now Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince of Saudi Arabia, is definitely handicapped, definitely weakened in significant ways inside his country, within the region, with the implications of the Jamal Khashoggi murder. And so that has putting all of his eggs in one basket, meaning Jared Kushner with Mohammed bin Salman on this, has really then upended the peace deal. And that's brought Saeb Erekat back in the news, because you've brought, if you don't have Mohammed bin Salman able to deliver the region, then you've got to come back to the Palestinians, and it's kind of a seesaw.
What about, one of the questions came from the audience that said was a really good question, was how can you have any negotiation or peace plan until you reconcile your own government with Hamas? Explain that to our audience, Steve Clemons.
Yeah, well, that question was, I think, an important one. Right now, you have a split government. You have Hamas in greater control in Gaza. You've also had, the last time that elections were held in Palestine, this was during the Bush administration, and you may remember Condoleezza Rice, George Bush, and everyone said, we want to see elections to proceed. And many of them were telling the Bush administration, including myself at the time, if you have elections, Hamas will win. What will you do? And the view from President Bush at that time is, we have to respect the electoral process. Well, sure enough, Hamas won. And they entered into, because Hamas knew, I think Hamas was surprised that it won, but Hamas ended up in a situation where they ended up having the prime minister, but they gave Fatah, the competing party, the presidency with Mahmoud Abbas, and they had a split government. That government eventually divided, and Hamas was essentially pushed out. It was a violent divide again. And so they have kind of an ongoing sort of simmering potential civil war in that country between two parties. And so the country remains deeply divided. Many are skeptical. There are some on the Fatah side that are very skeptical of Hamas. There are many Hamas followers that believe that, Israel should be put out of its existence, though there are some Hamas followers that think they can come to some deal if they're given autonomy and the right of self-determination. So it's a confusing picture, but what is very clear and what this guy was trying to push, and Erekat literally exploded on stage, it was an incredible moment in the Doha Forum, is that he basically said, how can we deal with you if you can't deliver your government, if you can't deliver your people? And this has been the failure and weakness of the current president of Palestine, who's been unable, he's kind of gone into a hole, and he's kind of on a shrinking island where the beaches are eroding away, and you're ending up not only with Hamas rising again in popularity, but very clearly a division that's unreconciled. And so it's very hard to figure out who to negotiate with on what terms. So the person's point was exactly right on target, and Erekat went crazy with it in response and just showed that he was, in my view, largely irrelevant to the answer on the future of Palestine, to be honest.
I agree with that. And then I'm going to get to Joe Biden in a second, but I'm going to ask you one other part to get your take on it. I forget the panel, but Brett McGurk was there, right? Special envoy to the president on ISIS. And, I'm a Trump supporter, as you know. I was a Virginia
I respect
chairman.
that.
And,
I got about 97 out of 100 cousins that are Trump supporters, too, so I get it.
I know you said that in one of your panels.
Yeah.
I'm with the 97 and tell them that you talked to me, and I hope they all vote for him again in 2020. Plus, actually, I want to pick up the other three in your family. But it was interesting, McGurk said there was a question, and it might have come from the audience or the moderator, I don't remember. But the question was, what's the difference? What's been different from the Obama administration and the Trump administration? Because he served first George W., then he stayed with Obama, which is rare in that kind of a job, but he stayed through now 3 administrations. and he said, well, the Russians in Syria kind of knew what Obama was going to do. He wasn't going to do anything. On the other hand, he said Trump is unpredictable. They don't know what the hell he's going to do. In fact, he's used the military there 2 times in 24 months, so they don't really know what he's going to do. Therefore, they operate differently. Well, I thought that was tremendous insight.
Yeah.
Steve.
Peter Bergen, my colleague, I actually hired Peter Bergen when I was at the New America Foundation. Peter is CNN's terrorism analyst, and Peter was the guy who found Osama bin Laden in 1997 when the CIA couldn't find him. And so he organized the first interview of bin Laden in 97, well before 9/11. And an interesting panel. Brett McGurk, of course, is the presidential envoy for coordinating allies on ISIS and the broad, Middle East, North Africa, anywhere where ISIS has had a footprint. Brett McGurk has been involved. And I think Brett is right, and he said this before, that he saw the Obama administration as too timid, too cautious, and too predictable. And he sees Donald Trump as having injected a kind of backbone into some of the steps America was taking. It doesn't mean you want to be reckless, but it does mean that if you put a red line up and you say you're going to not allow chemical weapons, then you're going to take action on those. And I think McGurk was pleased that President Trump struck out. Now, I was critical of President Trump on those strikes because I called them polite strikes. They were too neat, I would have liked to have a little more messiness. If we're going to strike, I wanted to actually take out some of the Syrian power. But that's an argument. I wanted President Trump to be a little bit more messy, which many
right.
of my colleagues disagree with me. But I think that McGurk is right that there's been, at least in Syria, were more actions that really maintained, I think, the sense of American power there than people may realize. I think that has helped him as a negotiator in some of that. So that was a very good revelation that he shared.
Yeah, it was good. You wanted to strike like Reagan did to Gaddafi when he put missiles inside his home and took out members of his family, right? I mean, that's
whether his family
that's
or
the
not
kind of
his
thing
family,
that was.
But we didn't. I mean, we gave everybody sort of advance notice. These were 4 a.m. hits. Nobody was in the building, and the airfield that we bombed was in operation again within 24 hours. That's a polite strike. It didn't disable the facilities. And we knew, honestly, the thing that I'm really upset about is that we knew some of the sites where these chlorine gas production facilities are, and it is beyond me why we didn't bomb the hell out of them.
We're with Steve Clemons. He is national editor for the magazine The Atlantic, also their Washington correspondent. Steve, I just got 1 minute. I'm running out of time, but you've covered Joe Biden a lot. And is Joe Biden going to run for president?
I have no idea, but I will tell you that if he doesn't, it will wreck him because every bit of DNA in his body sees it as unpatriotic not to run. I think he sees from his perspective, and you guys are not on the same zone here, but he sees the country needing someone like him, and that not to step into that would be a big mistake. And if you read his book, basically A Promise to My Son, or Promise, about Beau Biden, you sort of see that for him not to run would be a violation of the things that he wrote in that book. So my gut tells me he is going to run. I got to tell you, I was at a party last night with Mike Bloomberg. I'd say the same thing about him. I think Mike Bloomberg's going to run. I think a lot of people are going to run. We were talking about this on the plane. I think the field is going to be so big. And some of the people are going to be big names we know, like Biden, possibly Bloomberg and others. But I think you're going to see a lot of new names. They've been talking to Beto O'Rourke, but I bet there are other names we haven't even heard of that could pop. And it's going to be one of the most fascinating. It'll be like what you guys had on the Republican side. It's going to be a fascinating, kind of paintball game to see who knocks out whom as they percolate this next year.
All right, Steve Clemons, who knows Joe Biden very well, predicts Biden and Bloomberg run. I don't think there's any doubt both of them are going to run. And if you're Mayor Bloomberg, why not, right? You got bajillions of dollars.
His last
but here's
chance.
what's going to be interesting.
Last chance.
His last chance, but here's what's going to be interesting. Every time, I know we have to, and we will do that. Steve, I'm out of time. What's your Twitter handle? SC
Clemons.
Steve.
So SCCLEMONS. Happy to
right.
chat with anyone.